Hello, my name is Dr. Candlepun, and this is the orientation for my new Lost podcast. This orientation contains no spoilers for the series Lost. Its purpose is to introduce myself, my regular co host, and the overall format of this podcast. Not long before the recording started, however, there was an incident. Due to my own lack of experience in producing a podcast, combined with what can only be described as my own ineptitude, I failed to reconnect the microphone after testing the audio quality. If you are watching the video version of this orientation, you will be able to see that the red light on the microphone before me is on. However, over the next 30 minutes, you will see this same microphone before me and my co-host, where it will be plain to see that the red light is not on, something I somehow failed to notice over the hour-long recording session. Thankfully, the microphone on the camera itself was decent enough that it was not necessary to go back and re-record the entire orientation. That said, the audio quality of this orientation does not reflect the level of quality you should expect in future episodes. This is, of course, a frustrating mistake on my part, but one I feel confident I have learned from. So without further ado, let's begin. Hello, and welcome to Dr. Candlepun's Lost Podcast. I am Dr. Candlepun, but my real name is Christopher Huth, and with me is my co-host,
Mike Huth.
Anybody that is watching or listening to this, I am assuming, is familiar with Lost. Perhaps you've seen the show, perhaps you haven't, but hopefully if you're watching this or listening to it, you're interested in the show at least. So yeah, I figure we should introduce ourselves and talk about how we're familiar with Lost and kind of what this podcast is going to be. So I'm going to let you tell them about yourself, however much you feel like.
Well, again, I'm Mike Huth, Chris's uncle, the youngest brother of his father, Chip. And Chris has always been my kind of go-to guy for getting deep into whatever films or shows that I'm watching. And when I think about Lost, I think about the first time I saw the commercial air that the show was coming on, and the plane going down, and this mysterious island, and the survivors on the beach, and just everything they were showing. I'm thinking to myself, like, man, is this going to be aliens? Is this going to be some kind of like weird spiritual like curse thing? I didn't know what it was going to be, but I knew I had to watch it. And so I thought about it over and over again. And the very next time I saw Chris, I'm like, oh, you got to watch this show.
Well, yeah. So the way I remember it is, so back when the first season was airing, which had started in the fall of 2004, and then went into 2005. So the week after New Year's, my brother and I were staying with you because our dad and stepmom were out of town. And while we were staying with you that week, that Wednesday was the new episode of Lost. And I had also heard of the show. I had seen the same commercials before it started, but I didn't watch it up until that point. And yeah, so that Wednesday, like, you weren't going to miss the episode. Yeah. So I still remember what the episode was called, too. It was, or I remember which episode it was. It was Whatever the Case May Be. And yeah, so you weren't going to miss the episode. So we all watched it, and in between, like, every commercial break, like, you would be like telling us, like, okay, so this is what's going on with this character, and I remember, like, me and my brother just being like, what? Like, this show is so crazy, and yeah, I won't get into the spoilers here, but yeah,
no surprise why you're my go-to guy for things, right? You remembered all of that.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it did make a big impression, like both the episode itself, which now that I've seen the show in its entirety many times, it's actually one of the weaker episodes in my opinion. But it was enough. Like that episode was quality enough, especially with I was 13 at the time, about to turn 14. Yeah, it was interesting enough. Plus, with everything you were saying about the stuff that had already happened that we hadn't seen, I was like, yeah, I want to watch more of this show. And I know I watched the next week's episode, and then I kind of fell off of it for a while. I remember reading up on it before season 2 started, and then they did like a recap clip show before season 2 started. And that kind of caught me up. And then, yeah, I don't have to get into every detail of every episode I saw and missed, but I was basically hooked from the start of season 2. That Christmas, like while season 2 was airing, my mom got me the DVD set of the first season, and that was the first time I actually went and watched the entire thing. And then, yeah, from there I was hooked. I was into the show. I was following the online discussions and stuff. And then, yeah, every once in a while, like when we would see each other, like we would talk about it, and just be like, "Oh my god, that was crazy," right? And yeah, those were always really fun conversations. So you watched the show all the way through when it ended, right?
Yes.
Okay. Do you remember like your overall opinion? Like, did you like it the whole way through? Did you get frustrated with it at any point?
You know what, I feel like I liked it all the way through. I don't recall ever getting frustrated like I have with more recent series that I've watched, where it's never ending drama. I remember just being glued to every episode. I remember when a specific thing happened. I don't want to get into spoilers, but I remember thinking to myself, like, man, they're gonna tell us what's going on right now? Like, we're gonna find that out this early? And I was super stoked because I sometimes that you keep me hanging on for too long and I might lose my interest type thing.
Yeah.
And I never at any point watching the Lost series did I sense that I was like, I don't know if I'm going to watch the next one. Like, I was glued, ready to watch that next episode. And then later I would talk to you and find out all the stuff that I intellectually missed, but still enjoyed it at my level. And then when you would fill me in on those things afterward, it just had a whole new meaning. I found myself going back and watching something again with that thought in mind that you gave me. So yeah, it's great.
So do you remember, like, when it got to like the end? Basically, Lost kind of has this reputation in the minds of people that have never seen it, and in people that very casually watched it. It kind of there are many misconceptions about the way that it ended, and the lack of answers that it seemed to give. Do you remember feeling frustrated or confused about any of that?
There's no shot I wasn't confused a little bit until I talked to you. But I don't remember being frustrated. I just remember, if anything, just kind of feeling like, well, it's one of these things where I've probably missed something that ties it in. And I think I recall when I talked to you, there wasn't that, that aha moment where you told me something. I was like, oh, okay, then that's what it is. But again, I grew up reading books like Shane, where it purposely leaves you hanging at the end to decide whether the main character died or the main character lived. Mm-hmm. And so it kind of grew up in an era where they would do that sometimes, whether it was literature or shows. You didn't always get that answer, and you had to be okay with that. And I think they wanted you kind of making your own ending. And I got a little bit of a sense, from the end of Lost that they didn't feel like you had to have the answer. Like, that was the part that was cool. You didn't have to have the exact answer. Whatever your answer was probably good enough.
I agree 100%. Although I would add, and this is something that I've actually made many YouTube videos trying to illustrate. But there are a lot of more concrete answers that are given by the show, but they're not explicitly stated. They're kind of there. They give you the pieces for you to kind of figure it out yourself.
Yeah.
Put the picture together and be like, okay. But with that said, a lot of times they'll give you the pieces to kind of form your own version of the answer. So there is a lot of ambiguity and a lot of stuff open to more subjective interpretation, like you were just saying. But yeah, there are a lot of people that think like, oh, they were just making it up as they went along. They didn't know. They didn't know what was going on, and that's just very demonstrably untrue. Like if you look at what's in the show, it's very clearly that they're pointing you.
If there were any truth to it, they should still be making movies off the cuff, because shows off the cuff. Because yeah.
Well, I mean, this is a bit off topic, but some shows like Breaking Bad and Better Call Saul, which I don't know if you've watched those.
Oh yes, I have.
Okay, yeah, yeah, I love those shows too. They are very open about the fact that they were making those up as they went along, and I mean, just look at how good those shows are.
Yeah, they're true.
But yeah, so yeah, I don't think there's anything inherently wrong with people making up as they went along, but it's just very untrue when it comes to Lost, and it's very obviously untrue. So as you were watching it back then, like did you ever go back, like when a new season would be starting, did you ever go back and rewatch the previous seasons, or like did you just kind of like go off of what you remembered and just start the new season?
Yeah, I've never been the type of person that has the time to go back, or maybe the patience to go back and rewatch something. And sometimes I even get bored with the recaps. And it's like, like I'll see a recap and it refreshes my mind, or at least I think it does, enough that I'm ready to move forward with the rest of the storyline. But with Lost, I did find myself watching any little recaps, per episode or per season. I would watch those recaps religiously because it would help. I don't know that I ever picked anything up, but because I had you as my fallback, so I don't know that I ever picked anything up from them and changed the thought process, but I did find myself doing that. But watching a whole season, no, I couldn't find the time for it.
Gotcha. So the last time you've watched a full episode would have been when the finale aired. What is that? 14 and a half years ago.
Yeah, that would have been it.
So, do you remember a lot then about what actually happened in the show?
Man, I could break it down for you like plane crash, survivors, numbers like that. But yeah, no. I think the thing that sticks out to me in my memory was the I don't know if I want to call it 7 degrees of separation, but the connection that all the people that ended up on the plane had, because that's one of those things that's near and dear to me in life. Like I come across people that I talk to and I find out that we were on the same scene together on something 10, 15 years ago. And it was like, wow, we don't remember one another, but we were there at that same moment in time, and then the different connections. So I that really like struck a chord with me in Lost, knowing that in one way or another they were all connected.
Yeah. Okay, so, and we haven't really talked about this yet, but what this podcast is going to be is us going back and rewatching the show episode by episode, and then us discussing each episode. And then each podcast episode will be released on the 20th anniversary of said episode that we are discussing. So this will be your first time rewatching, and hopefully you'll have the patience for it, since it's been so long. I guess we'll kind of see how much you remember as we go. In my mind, when it's you and I talking, these probably they probably won't have too many heavy spoilers. I mean, unless you start remembering a bunch of stuff, I'm not opposed to talking about that, and we can put up spoiler warnings and so forth. But generally speaking, I'm thinking these won't be too spoiler heavy. So obviously we've talked about, you haven't rewatched the show, whereas I have rewatched it more times than I can count. Ever since it ended, there's probably been 8 to 10 different people that I've had in my life, different family members and friends that I have introduced to the show, and I've watched it with them, like the entire thing. And it's just been very validating of my opinion of the show and the overall quality of it from beginning to end. But yeah, so I'm much more familiar with the show. I have a YouTube channel that I started when COVID started. Basically, I kind of wanted to combat that reputation that Lost has for not answering questions and not knowing, them making up the stories that went along. So I started making video essays talking about, various, allegedly unanswered questions, and kind of just illustrating why they in fact were answered. And then from there, the channel kind of evolved into, I would get a lot of feedback from the people that viewed it, other Lost fans that are familiar with the show. And, they would kind of raise counterpoints or, ask follow-up questions, or just offer, their differing opinions and perspectives. And so then I kind of started a sub-series of videos where I would be responding to that feedback. And to be honest, like, those are kind of my favorite videos that I do on the channel, just because I think, so back when I watched Lost back in the day, I remember going to school and talking to other kids in my journalism class about, the previous night's episode, and, them pointing out things that I missed, and then kind of offering different perspectives on and ideas on things. And like, for me, that was almost as exciting as the episodes themselves.
Yeah.
What was that discussion? And so that's why those videos on the YouTube channel have kind of become my favorite, because it's that in a way. It's a recreation of that, versus the video essays are just kind of me talking about my opinions. With that in mind, what I would really like from you guys, the listeners, the viewers, I would really like you guys to email in, or even comment on this video if you're watching this on YouTube. But basically just share your thoughts and experiences and memories of when you watched the show. You can either talk about the series broadly, or season 1 specifically, or the specific episode that we're going to be talking about. You can, hey, I remember where I was when I watched this. I remember what I thought when I watched this. And we would love to hear those things, and we'd love to discuss them on the podcast. Now, you can be as spoilery or unspoilery as you want with those emails. I'm going to be the one that goes through them, and I figure we can talk about the ones that I think won't ruin anything for you. Because I basically, if you don't remember something, I don't want to remind you of it before the show reminds you of it.
Right.
It's cool if you remember stuff as we go. I'm not worried about that, but I don't want to spoil anything for you. Sure. So yeah, I'll go through the emails, and the more spoilery ones I will address in a separate section of the podcast, which may or may not be a separate episode. We're going to see how lengthy our discussions are, and then if I want to do a separate spoilery episode where it's just me talking about the episode in the context of the bigger picture, then yeah, that'll be a separate episode. Or if both of those, if me by myself is a shorter thing and us talking isn't that lengthy, then it might just be 2 separate sections of the same podcast episode. We'll kind of figure that out as we get going. But anyway, the point is, depending on how spoilery your emails are, either I will address it on my own in that section, or we will talk about it together. But yeah, any thoughts on any of the episodes that we're going to be talking about, we would absolutely love for you guys to share. Because the hope is that we get a wide range of people that are going to be listening and watching this podcast. People that are very familiar with the show, like me, that are just interested in hearing people revisit it. Or what I would really like is to have some people who did watch the show more casually, like you did back in the day, but that had a more negative experience because of how casually they watched it. Maybe they felt like, certain things were really dragged out because they didn't binge it the way a lot of people have since. And maybe they got frustrated and tired, or, hell, this was back before streaming, and TiVo was a pretty new thing as the show was airing. So I think there were a lot of people, I know I had this experience in the first couple seasons, where they would miss an episode and they wouldn't really have a way of figuring out what they missed. And, yes. and then maybe they would be kind of lost, pun intended, going forward from that point. And the point is that there may be people that haven't gone back and revisited the show since it aired, and maybe, this podcast will encourage some people to go back and give it another shot. And, maybe part of the fun will be you guys discovering how much you remember, how much you didn't remember, and see if your opinions improve or not of the show overall. So
yeah, absolutely. That's what I'm excited about, is just the idea of I can't lose. If I don't remember anything, if I'm not watching an episode and then get this rush of information back, great, I'm watching Lost again. And if I do,
like it's the first time.
Yeah, like it's the first time. And if I do, then I'm gonna remember something, and then I'm gonna be more anxious to move forward through the episode. So,
well, you might pick up. I like to talk, in my personal life, to people about the value of rewatching things. Like they're like, I get like, oh, it's not as exciting because I know what's going to happen, but there really is another level of value to be had in kind of like, oh, I see where this is going. I can appreciate the way they were building up to this, and that kind of thing. So yeah, like I said, I don't think you can lose.
It's a win-win.
Yeah.
So all you casual Lost fans, you're with me. Come in here, and then Chris will help us all out.
Well, yeah. What I want to try and avoid is telling you what to think, because that's kind of what I was talking about with the video essays a minute ago. Is that's me sharing my interpretation of things, And don't get me wrong, I like doing that. I put a lot of thought into those things. I put a lot of thought into Lost and my perspective on those things. And I'm excited to share those things as we go along. But, yeah, it is the more subjective elements of that. There are things that are left to interpretation. I don't want to, tell you, oh, well, this is what was going on.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I want to watch that, and I definitely want to have you. I know you're not as analytical as I am about fictional things.
I hear what you're saying. I can come to my own kind of conclusions. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, we could talk about, oh, well, I agree or disagree because of this or whatever. And, you might change my mind. That's literally happened each time I've watched the show with other people that have never seen it. They've often pointed out things that I myself have never caught. Every time I rewatch the show, I've caught new things. I can't believe I never picked up on that. So yeah, that's the value of rewatching it, in my opinion.
Love it.
Now, there is one more subset of viewers or listeners that I would really like this podcast to find, and that is people who have never seen the show. Maybe they've heard of it, maybe they've thought about watching it, and maybe they've been deterred because of the rumors and misinformation that's out there. So, if there are people that are watching or listening to this introductory episode who have family or friends that have never watched the show, I would really like this to be a good excuse for you to try and get them into the show for the first time. I know I myself am going to be doing that with people local to where we live. The way that I'm doing that is I am currently in talks with a couple of local theaters, exploring the possibility of doing weekly screenings of the first season of Lost. I've talked to a number of people in the local filmmaker community. These are the types of people that like discussing and analyzing the things that they watch. I've kind of talked to them about me doing this podcast and me trying to organize these screenings, and so far it seems like there's a lot of interest in people joining those screenings. And what I'd like to have happen is that I could then talk to some of these people who have never seen the show before, and maybe get them to talk amongst themselves about each episode as people that don't know where it's going, and kind of recreate in that way the experience, that I at least had, or, that we had together,
Sure.
Back in the day, talking about what we thought was going to happen. So yeah, I'm trying to organize that. And then and while doing that, I've also found other people that have varying degrees of familiarity with the show, people that have rewatched it like me, people that haven't rewatched it in a long time, that are also interested in attending the screenings. And maybe I could even interview them for certain podcast episodes about, their experience, kind of what we were talking about with the mail, you guys sending in the emails. Maybe I can find some local people that actually want to come on the podcast and talk about it in person. So yeah, that is a bit up in the air. It seems fairly certain I'm going to be able to make at least some of these screenings happen. But as far as how many people actually want to talk about it and be featured on a podcast, that's more, yet to be determined.
Did you tell them what the email address is?
No, that would probably help. So if you guys want to send in emails, which please do, that email address is dr.candlepun@gmail.com.
So Dr. Candlepun.
Yeah, dr as in doctor, .candlepun. Just like the title of the podcast, Dr. Candlepun's Lost Podcast.
Am I supposed to remember something about that?
So, yeah, no. So anybody that is less familiar with the show or doesn't remember it very clearly, you may not understand what the logo is referencing or what the title is referencing. Not during the first season. That's going to be something that you'll understand when we get into the second season. Basically, Dr. Candlepun is something that I came up with when I started the YouTube channel as a bit of a joking reference to something that happens later on, specifically in season 2. And I'm sure we'll talk about that on the podcast once we get to season 2. The title that I've been using for my YouTube channel has been Getting Lost. And there was a time, when I initially thought about doing a podcast where I considered, just calling the podcast Getting Lost. But I eventually found out that there already is a Lost podcast called Getting Lost, and they've been around for quite a while before my YouTube channel. And I was a bit mortified to find that out because I felt kind of bad, taking that name when they had already used it. Um, and yeah, ever since I've tried to make it clear that I'm a separate thing. Anyways, so when trying to come up with a name for the podcast, I was like, well, I've been using that Dr. Candlepun thing, as a joking reference, but that's something unique to my channel. That's something that nobody else has used. So why don't I just call it Dr. Candlepun's Lost Podcast? I might even end up changing the title of the YouTube channel just to make it more clear that it is associated with this podcast and not Clint and Adam, who are the hosts of the Getting Lost podcast. Another reason I'm kind of thinking about changing the name of that is because there is also a documentary that is coming out. I believe it's supposed to be coming out on the 20th anniversary as well. But they are also using the title Getting Lost, and they are not associated with me or the original podcast. So basically, since Getting Lost is such a popular title that people are using, including myself, for Lost stuff, I feel like I should maybe kind of move away from that and use something more unique, and that's kind of why I've settled on the Dr. Candlepun idea. Now, I have no idea how popular this podcast is going to be. We don't necessarily expect it to be that popular. We are talking about a show that ended almost 15 years ago and that started, almost 20 years ago. Yeah, we don't know. But if you guys would like to help us try and grow the podcast, we would definitely appreciate that. A big goal of this podcast is to once again kind of combat the reputation that the show has, kind of encourage people to either give it another chance or give it a chance for the first time. And so there are a couple of ways that you can help us. The easiest one is to share it with people that you know. Like I said, if there are family members or friends that you have that, have never seen the show and that you think might be interested in it or think might get something out of it, maybe share the podcast with them. As someone that's never done a podcast before, I can only go off of what I've heard as far as like how the ratings help. I hear plenty of other podcasters talk about reviewing and giving 5 stars and all that stuff. That's supposed to help the podcast. I don't know.
Algorithm push it to the top.
Yeah,
more people viewing. Yeah.
I am more familiar with YouTube, so if you are listening or watching this on YouTube, then liking the video and commenting on it, I know that all helps with the algorithm stuff. Now, if you did want to make a monetary donation, we have set up a Ko-fi and a Patreon. The Ko-fi is kofi.com/candlepun, and the Patreon is patreon.com/candlepun. On Ko-fi, you can donate as much or as little as you want, starting as low as $1. Any donation of any amount, even if it's just a one-time donation and not a recurring one, because Ko-fi does give you that option, will get you a verbal credit in each podcast episode released while you are an active donor or within a 30-day window of your one-time donation. Every donor will be credited regardless of dollar amount, unless for some reason they don't want to be. But the credits will be organized from the highest to lowest donations for each month. Now, on Ko-fi, you can specify your dollar amount. On Patreon, it doesn't really work that way. The creators themselves can set up tier levels that donors can choose from, but I am not really a fan of excluding anybody from, certain perks simply because they haven't donated enough. I don't know, as somebody that likes, other YouTube channels and other podcasts and stuff, I don't like feeling like I miss out on content simply because I may not be able to afford, donating at a certain level. And so for that reason, I don't love the idea of setting up exclusive tiers. And that's why, I just kind of want to credit the highest donors first, but not exclude anybody from being credited if they've donated at all. So with that in mind, on the Patreon, I've only set up one tier, which is a $5 tier. That is the most and the least that you'd be able to donate at one time. You can either make that a one-time donation or subscribe and then cancel anytime. Now, the other thing that all donors will receive is something that you'll really only understand if you have seen towards the end of the series. So I'm not going to get into the spoilery explanation for what it is I'm referencing here. But basically, you will be displayed on a chalkboard wall with either your last name or whatever name you'd like to go by, and you will be assigned a candidate number. Again, you may not know what I mean by candidate, and that's fine. But you will be assigned a candidate number that will be yours and only yours forever, even if you are no longer donating. That number we can either randomly assign to you, or you can choose it for yourself, so long as it hasn't already been assigned to somebody else. But once that has been assigned to you and you've gone up on the chalkboard wall, your name and number will be displayed in every video version of this podcast in perpetuity, regardless of when you are no longer donating. And it will be displayed in every YouTube video that I make separate from this podcast. So that's everything I can think of. Can you think of anything I'm forgetting?
I think we're ready to get lost.
All right, yeah. I'm hoping that you guys are as excited as we are, or at least somewhat excited. Once again, the first episode will go up on September 22nd, so please do be on the lookout for that.
We hope to see you then.
I would now like to give a special thank you to the currently active donors. These include candidate number 90, Ben Ward, candidate number 108, Jeffrey Winslow, candidate number 69, Brian Phillips, candidate number 32, Chuck Boyd, and candidate number 341, Hans. I would also like to give a special thank you to the multiple people that have donated equipment used in the production of this podcast. These include Mary Mullins, Brandon Huth, Charles Huth, and William McMinn. Until next time, namaste and good luck. I've never done a podcast before. Fuck. To like this video, click the thumbs up. Or, if there has been an incursion by the hostiles, click the thumbs down. To leave feedback, enter a comment below. To be notified when more videos arrive, click the circle and then select the notification bell. To view previous content from this channel, click either of the two boxes.